like my hot take is really just that I'm really, really sort of disappointed after a full year of being paid full time in sort of like the crypto space, but like not being paid by like a specific protocol when you look at actually how it all lays out, but like by a venture studio that's building different dApps. We have experience building some specific things that are like really DeFi primitives. And so you end up like sort of my job is to speak to networks. And oftentimes those networks are usually layer one networks, sometimes layer two networks, being built on top of Ethereum or being built on top of Solana or being built on top of any one of a number of different things. Like even Aurora, you could argue is being built on top of Near. But it's been really fun to get into the weeds and understand from a technical and architectural perspective what's being built and why, and sort of the why is the most interesting part. And oftentimes the why is extremely underwhelming. And I feel like most of the time the why is extremely underwhelming. And it really, when you think about it, it's just a transfer of the same like few thousand people exchanging value. When you look at the trend in terms of the total market cap of the industry of like these like DeFi primitives and mostly like crypto, including Bitcoin and including stable coins, it's flatlined. It's not really increasing. And there's this sort of narrative that we have more retail coming in, we have more people coming in. And I think that, we'd spoken about Pepe, this meme coin last week, and like there was some sort of like I sort of struggled this week with like, do we have a moral obligation to not talk about it because it's so cringe? And I think maybe the education component is positive, and it's very clear that we don't think it's a good investment. So that's a positive thing. But ultimately, like the fact that that's what it's being used for is really sad to me.
Yeah.
I think that I'm a little bit sort of just kind of sad about,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that there's such potential, especially with things like insurance, like micro farming insurance, and also the ability for there to be more infrastructure around like community banking, and we just see so little of that.
Yeah.
And I just don't know that that I'm terrible. I'm really, really glad by the use of time. I think that it's been a great opportunity to learn, but I'm a little bit disappointed in the lack of sort of like visionaries, and the people who pretend to be visionaries are ultimately just sort of like pumping their own bags, it seems, so to speak,
Yeah.
and like really just sort of like trying to have a cash grab, which is, I think, comes back to like Bitcoin is leaderless inherently, and I think
Yeah.
that is really, really, really powerful in and of itself. All the rest have leaders who are very happy to tell you that they're leading it, and when you look at when you look on chain, if you can, they oftentimes have a big bag that they're
Yeah.
pumping that they want to sell to
I
you.
know. I have a similar sentiment. I mean, the Pepe stuff's been depressing to see something that they clearly tell you has no inherent value pump up to like $600 million worth of value, hypothetic value. I was at a meetup last night, like DeFi Austin as a group, and a guy was talking, and he'd been in, I think he started writing for CoinDesk in like 2013, 2014.
Wow.
But he was like, if 10 years ago, I was hoping that there would be more things happening, and kind of the way that we've grown sideways with all these different networks is interesting for sure, but it is kind of almost like we're spreading value across rather than solving specific use cases. Like things that I'm interested in the most are Bitcoin as like a store of value or a way to send money. I think Ethereum's cool eventually for being able to do transactions in like USDC. I think NFTs are really cool for verifiable digital ownership. I think verifying your identity online and like zero knowledge stuff will be cool going forward. I think voting and being able to prove you voted and have fair voting processes is really cool. I don't think people who are in this industry though care. Like not everybody's working on those things. There's some people working on them, but also the fact that we kind of just create new tokens all the time and try to pump value. And even that guy was talking about price, like in mass adoption, when in reality, I think we have this problem where everybody's so focused on price because one of the biggest drivers for people getting into the space is like, well, you could have bought Bitcoin at $10 and now it's $30,000. Just imagine how much money you'd have if you put $1,000 in back then. That
Yeah.
still kind of plagues us and takes away from all these cool things. Like everybody wants to be in on the next
Yeah.
Bitcoin or be the one who's right or be the team who builds the thing. And I think some of the tech is cool for other L2s and L1s, but this idea that we need so many of them is tough to swallow when there's not that many people using it. The economy is bad, and people would rather buy pay than actually learn about shit. And it's tough.
And even if I'm sort of conflicted, because even if and when retail comes back, when interest rates, become more nominal, or, the macro perspective is interesting because there's so many conflicting, brilliant people who, I don't know, we'll see what happens in Q3 and Q4 and early 2024. But nonetheless, I think even if retail comes back, like, it feels almost manipulative to, just because you're the incumbent and you've been here longer, to then take that money from somebody, because that money comes from somebody,
True.
So that's something I really struggle with as well. Is like, there's this like complete and total impersonalization that happens to people who come in who are new, and it's like, oh, this is the learning. Like, I learned, you're going to learn as well because you're the new guy. It's like, that seems very. That's like, we didn't join it we were buddies in college because we didn't have the interest in being hazed. We wanted to just go hang out. Like, we don't have to haze people who are new to the industry. That feels very immature to me.
Yeah. Well, it sucks that if we stay, like, I plan on, I daily buy a few tokens through Coinbase, very small amounts, and I'll continue to do that for the next like 2-3 years, which is kind of my only investing strategy for the most part. And it will suck because unless everything gets banned as securities or whatever, and like we lose access to it in the US, there will be a point where retail people are hopping in crazy amounts and token prices go crazy. And, you either hold it or sell it. And
exactly.
it doesn't feel great, but also morally it feels better to not be purposefully doing that. We're just here because we enjoy it, and we do think it'll go up in value, and eventually we're probably going to get that value. But I share a similar sentiment. It feels bad to be. It hasn't happened yet. It's not like we made a bunch of money.
No, not even close. I've lost a lot of money, honestly.
We're those people, dude. But it's an interesting idea. And like, I mean, everybody tells you, every like seasoned investor is like, when it seems the worst is the time to buy, which is how I felt recently. It's like I've trained my brain to be like, when I think crypto is when I'm the most down on crypto is actually probably the best time to invest, which was like last fall. And then now again, I get the same feeling that I had last fall. And I think we're kind of just in this like valley of despair where things seem not great. And it's like just a couple people I mean, the crypto meetup I went to last night was, 10 to 12 guys in this space, just like chatting crypto. But if this was 2 years ago, or like end of 2021, that same room might have been 150 people,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's definitely low times.
Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely avoid talking about the fact that I get paid to be in this industry. I frame it as like being a software consultant, which is true. It's not inaccurate at all, but it does omit the underlying technology that we're building on, which is usually blockchain tech or distributed ledger tech. And so I'm just very self-conscious about it. It's certainly not something that because it's, I don't know, from a public discourse perspective, it's also sort of looked at as questionably. I'm not sure any other way to say it, but that's a hot take. That's like the one true hot take I've had since Malcolm Gladwell.
Well, I know. The funny thing is, what do we see? Was it Wells Fargo? A bunch of like big companies were building a blockchain this week. So the technology was solid. We're on solid ground. The question is like, are we doing with it the right things?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you had mentioned a few different verticals of really interesting technologies, and ultimately only one of them is decentralized finance, which is backwards because what you said, I think I really appreciate, and I understand. I like the nuance you had provided, because in reality, what we like 90% of what's being built is in that 1/5 of what it is you described. That's interesting. And so, it's really just a database architecture, right? So like a blockchain is really just a distributed ledger technology is really just, it's a federated model, in the same way that Blue Sky is. And really, it's just like the ability for this to be decentralized over multiple databases, which is a really interesting, novel thing. It's a piece of computing that's existed for a long time, but then the cryptography aspect, the ZK sync, the zero knowledge proof aspects, these are really interesting things being built on top of it. But the vast majority of applications are built in DeFi. and neither of us wanted to work in finance. And this is really just a derivative of finance called decentralized finance. And I've realized that over the year, it's like, fuck, like I really wish that people were building more interesting things on this.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of money that's flowing back and forth is really just being fed into DeFi to the same sorts of folks. And it's like, man, this is really disheartening. So we'll see over time as things sort of like, we're just not at the place yet. I think in the next 20 years, we'll see like sort of a tick up in those things because people who don't have access to equitable voting and don't have an incumbent system, maybe this will be an opportunity for them to build something interesting in the same way that banking might be, although that is technically also DeFi. As people sort of age out of or age into the ability to have more agency and use the internet more wholeheartedly, with the proliferation of the internet through things like what's the name of it? Starlink. So like with the availability of the internet increasing, the availability of sort of access to information increasing, I think that we can see an uptick in this in the next 20 years. But it just feels like we're I think that's pretty much all I've got to say about it.
I think that's cool.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Awesome. Nice. Well, shout out to Josiah Soren, our main man.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thanks, okay. Yeah, we appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a good talk, man.
Yeah, always. It's a little longer than usual, but we'll
worth it. Worth it.
Yeah.
We might clip that last bit too and just put out a clip on YouTube. I think that conversation about crypto is why we started this talking like this. Like we wanted content like that. And I'm glad we got to talk about it.
I agree. Absolutely. Awesome, man. Well, I'll see you here next week.
All right, next week.
All right. Ciao, ciao.